My husband disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he stood in our kitchen, looked me right in the eyes, and told me he needed space to heal his soul. 7 days later, a courier handed me a heavy envelope containing divorce papers. I did not scream. I did not throw plates against the wall. I simply took a black pen and signed on the dotted line. But as I started packing up my home office that afternoon, my eyes caught a tiny, almost invisible reflection. A forgotten security camera tucked behind a row of thick accounting textbooks. I downloaded the footage from the exact days he was supposedly finding himself at a silent retreat. What I saw on that screen made my blood run cold, and then it made me smile. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer to say we are not doing this divorce. Not after what I just saw. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old, working as a senior financial auditor, and I am about to show you exactly how to dismantle a manipulative husband using his own arrogance against him. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart someone who thought they could destroy your life. The air in our upscale suburban home felt unusually still that Tuesday afternoon. I stood alone at the marble kitchen island, staring down at the legal documents Harrison had his expensive attorney draft. We had been married for 6 years. 6 years of building a life supporting his ambitious career as an investment fund manager and supposedly functioning as a team. The settlement offer was insulting. It suggested I keep the house, which sounded generous, until my trained auditor eyes calculated the hidden reality. The property taxes were skyrocketing, the roof needed a total replacement, and the mortgage was dangerously close to being underwater. He was offering me a sinking ship while he sailed away on a luxury lifeboat. I capped my pen, leaving my signature crisp and final on the last page. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a prolonged emotional legal battle. If he wanted out, he could have it. I walked down the hall to my home office to start boxing up my personal files. I needed to separate my life from his before the weekend. As I reached for a stack of reference books on the top shelf, my hand brushed against something cold and plastic. It was a small, cube-shaped nanny camera. I had purchased it over a year ago when we had a revolving door of housekeepers just to ensure nothing went missing from my workspace. I had completely forgotten it was there, constantly recording, constantly uploading to a secure cloud drive. A sharp instinct kicked in. Harrison claimed he went off the grid for a silent retreat last weekend, completely unreachable. He said he needed total isolation to process his feelings about our marriage. I sat down at my desk, booted up my personal tablet, and logged into the camera software. I filtered the archives, scrolling back to last Tuesday, the exact day he supposedly drove up to the mountains without his cell phone. The video thumbnail showed movement in my office at 2 in the afternoon. I clicked play. The high-definition footage loaded instantly. The audio was crystal clear. The door to my home office opened, and Harrison walked in. He was not wearing the hiking gear he had packed. He was wearing his custom-tailored navy suit. And he was not alone. A man carrying a sleek leather briefcase followed him inside. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Harrison walked straight to my desk and opened my secure work laptop. He bypassed the standard security using a backup code I thought only I knew. Then his voice filled the quiet room, crisp and completely devoid of emotion. He told the man to move the $4 million to the Cayman Limited Liability Company. He said once the divorce is finalized, she gets the house and its underwater mortgage, and I walk away clean. I sat frozen in my desk chair. $4 million. That was the entirety of our joint investment portfolio, the money we had supposedly locked away in a high-yield trust for our future. He was not just leaving me. He was actively orchestrating a massive financial fraud to leave me completely bankrupt. He was forging my digital signature to funnel marital assets into an offshore shell company. The betrayal was so profound it bypassed my capacity for tears. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. Harrison thought he was the smartest person in the room. He forgot he married an auditor who uncovers corporate financial crimes for a living. I picked up my phone, dialed my attorney, and told her to freeze the paperwork. The game had just changed. Meredith stopped the filing. I spoke the moment my attorney answered her phone. My voice was dangerously calm, surprising even myself. Do not submit those signed divorce papers to the court under any circumstances. Meredith paused. Audrey, what happened? Did he threaten you? He did something much worse. I kept my eyes glued to the paused frame on my computer screen, staring at the face of the man I had married. I have him on camera, Meredith. I have high-definition video and crystal-clear audio of Harrison bringing a stranger into our home 3 days ago. They used my secure work laptop to illegally transfer $4 million of our joint marital assets into an offshore shell company. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When Meredith finally spoke, her tone had shifted from a sympathetic divorce attorney to a predatory litigator. Are you absolutely certain, Audrey? A claim like that changes everything. I am a senior financial auditor. I reminded her, my fingers flying across my keyboard as I started duplicating the video files to multiple secure cloud servers. Tracking dirty money is literally what corporations pay me top dollar to do. Tracking my own husband's amateur attempt at offshore money laundering is going to be the easiest project of my career. I watched the footage again. He explicitly stated his plan on the recording. He said once the divorce is finalized, I get this house and its underwater mortgage, and he walks away clean. I heard Meredith typing rapidly on her end. Okay. If he is actively concealing assets in anticipation of a divorce, we are looking at a textbook case of dissipation of marital assets. But if he forged your digital signature to authorize a massive wire transfer, we are crossing over into federal wire fraud and identity theft. Audrey, he is handing us the ultimate weapon, but we have to play this perfectly. Tell me exactly what to do, I said. Do not confront him. Meredith's instructions were sharp and precise. Do not let him know you found that camera. We need him to formally submit his financial disclosure affidavit to the court. We need him to swear under penalty of perjury that his total assets are practically zero. The moment he signs that legal document lying about the $4 million, we have him completely trapped. Can you trace the destination of the funds without alerting his bank? I already am, I replied. I opened a new secure browser tab and accessed my firm's advanced forensic accounting software. I zoomed in on the paused security footage, squinting at the reflection of my laptop screen, visible in the glass doors of my office cabinet. The resolution was just sharp enough. I could make out the routing numbers and the exact name of the Cayman Limited Liability Company they were using. It was registered under the name Apex Holdings, LLC. I typed the company name into the global registry database. The results populated instantly. My stomach twisted into a tight knot, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. Meredith, I whispered, staring at the registration documents on my screen. He did not just move the money. He used my social security number to register the shell company. He set it up so that if the federal authorities ever investigate this offshore account, the paper trail leads directly back to me. He was planning to leave me bankrupt and frame me for tax evasion. A low whistle came through the phone. Your husband is either a criminal mastermind or the most arrogant fool I have ever encountered, Meredith said. He is a fool who underestimated his wife, I corrected her. I need you to secure that footage, Meredith instructed. Make physical copies, put them in a safety deposit box. And Audrey, you need to leave that house. If he thinks he has outsmarted you, he will become careless. But if he senses you know something, he might try to destroy the evidence or escalate his behavior. I pulled a blank encrypted flash drive from my desk drawer and began transferring the security footage, the server logs, and the offshore registry documents. I am packing my bags right now, I told her. I will move into a hotel downtown by tonight. He wants this house so badly he can have its crumbling foundation and its toxic energy. Good, Meredith said. We let him think he is winning the war. Let him act arrogant. Let him bring his absurd settlement offers to the mediation table. We will smile, nod, and let him dig his own legal grave. I ended the call, pulling the flash drive from the port and slipping it into the hidden zipper pocket of my purse. I felt a strange sense of liberation. The man I loved was dead, replaced by a greedy stranger on a security tape, but the woman he left behind was entirely awake and armed with the truth. I reached for an empty cardboard box to finish packing my office. Just as I folded the bottom flaps, the heavy wooden front door downstairs slammed open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer. Audrey. Harrison's voice rang out, laced with a sickeningly sweet fake concern. I am home early. We need to talk about the house. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into a mask of quiet defeat. The trap was set. Now I just had to welcome him into it. I stepped out of my home office and walked down the hallway to meet him. Harrison was standing in the center of the foyer, dropping his leather briefcase onto the console table. He looked immaculate. His hair was perfectly styled, and his suit was pressed without a single wrinkle. This was not the appearance of a man who was deeply conflicted or emotionally devastated by the end of his marriage. This was a man executing a calculated business transaction. I kept my shoulders slumped slightly, offering him the exact version of the heartbroken wife he expected to see. I crossed my arms defensively, looking down at the hardwood floor before finally meeting his eyes. "You are home early," I said, keeping my voice quiet and unsteady. "I thought you would be at the office until late preparing for the quarterly review." Harrison let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. He walked past me into the kitchen, opening the stainless steel refrigerator to pour himself a glass of sparkling water. "I needed to leave the office," he said, leaning against the cool marble counter. "My energy is completely depleted, Audrey. This transition is incredibly taxing on my mental health. I have been doing a lot of deep journaling, really honoring my truth and acknowledging that this environment is currently filled with toxic attachments. I need to hold space for my own healing without external interference." It took every ounce of my professional self-control not to burst out laughing right in his face. He was standing there reciting phrases he probably memorized from a trendy pop psychology podcast, using them as a shield to cover up a multi-million-dollar federal felony. He was weaponizing the concept of mental health to justify throwing his wife onto the street. "I see," I replied softly, stepping into the kitchen but keeping a safe distance near the doorway. "So what exactly does your personal healing journey have to do with me packing my boxes today?" Harrison set his glass down, adopting a look of forced sympathy. He tilted his head, his tone dropping into a patronizing whisper, like he was speaking to a fragile, emotional child. "I spoke with my therapist and my attorney this morning," he began, lacing his fingers together. "We all agreed that a prolonged cohabitation is just going to delay the emotional closure we both desperately need. You staying here in this house is creating an unhealthy energetic boundary for my progress. I need this primary residence to ground my healing process. It is the only way I can truly find my center again and move forward." "You want me to move out immediately?" I clarified, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, hiding the sharp edges of my anger. "I am asking you to respect my journey," he corrected, waving a hand dismissively as if my inconvenience was trivial. "Look, the settlement offer my lawyer sent over is more than fair. You get to keep the property ultimately. But right now, for the next few months, I need the house. I need the physical space. You have a great salary. You can afford a nice extended stay hotel downtown, or maybe rent a small upscale apartment closer to your firm. It makes logical sense. Besides, I have already initiated the next steps." "What next steps?" I asked, tightening my grip on my own arms. He checked his expensive silver watch, avoiding my gaze for a fraction of a second. "My legal team has arranged for a security contractor to come by this Friday. They are updating the alarm system and legally changing the lock schedule. It is just standard procedure for a marital separation, Audrey. Nothing personal at all. But it does mean you need to have your essential belongings packed and out of here by Friday at exactly 5 in the afternoon. If you leave anything behind, I can have professional movers put it in a temporary storage unit for you." He was officially evicting me from the home I had paid half the mortgage on for 6 straight years. He was kicking me out on a 3-day notice under the convenient guise of spiritual healing. He thought I was incredibly weak. He thought the emotional shock of the sudden divorce papers had paralyzed my logical brain. I looked around the pristine kitchen thinking about the massive underwater debt permanently attached to this property. The roof that needed $30,000 in immediate repairs. The rising property taxes that were due next month. He was so eager to secure this house, entirely unaware that the asset he was claiming was actually a heavy financial anchor that would drag him to the bottom. Friday at 5, I repeated, letting my voice waver just enough to sound genuinely overwhelmed. Harrison, that is barely 3 days away. Where am I supposed to go on such incredibly short notice? You are a smart woman, Audrey, he said, offering a tight, condescending smile. You will figure it out, you always do. Just focus on signing the final settlement documents so we can process this legally. Once that is done, we can both move forward in absolute peace. Do not make this a hostile situation. Let us just act like mature adults. I looked at him, absorbing the sheer audacity of his rehearsed performance. He truly believed every single one of his own lies. He took another slow sip of his water, a smug, deeply satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He leaned back against the counter, completely relaxed, entirely convinced he had outplayed me, cornered me, and won the ultimate victory. I watched him stand there, entirely convinced of his own genius. He took another sip of his sparkling water, his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for a few more weeks to negotiate, to show him exactly how much power he held over my life. Instead, I let out a soft, relaxed breath and offered him a warm, genuine smile. I turned around and walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom. I grabbed the sleek black suitcase I had pulled from the closet earlier that afternoon. I methodically packed my essential clothes, my toiletries, and my most important financial documents. I zipped it closed, the sound sharp and definitive in the quiet house. When I rolled the suitcase back down the hallway, Harrison was still standing in the kitchen. His smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "You are leaving right now?" he asked, his voice losing a bit of its condescending edge. He clearly had not anticipated this level of immediate compliance. He wanted a fight so he could play the victim later. I did not answer him right away. I walked over to the marble island, reached into my purse, and pulled out my heavy set of house keys. I held them up for a moment, letting the metal catch the overhead lights before dropping them onto the counter. The heavy clatter echoed sharply against the expensive tile backsplash. "Take all the time you need to heal, Harrison," I said, keeping my tone impossibly light and pleasant. "I hope this physical space brings you all the emotional closure you are looking for." He narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by my calm demeanor. "Good," he muttered, trying to regain his footing. "I will have the movers contact you about the rest of your office furniture." "Oh, there is no need for that," I replied cheerfully, gripping the handle of my suitcase. "I am only taking my personal belongings. You can keep the furniture. In fact, you can keep all of it. Just a heads up, Harrison. When your lawyer sent over the initial settlement packet demanding I give up my equity in exchange for a clean break, he included the quitclaim deed. I signed it this morning." Harrison crossed his arms, looking bored. "Yes, Audrey, I know how property transfers work." "I do not think you do," I countered, taking a step toward the front door. "Because my attorney electronically filed that quitclaim deed with the county clerk the second I signed it. And since you so arrogantly pushed your mortgage company to pre-approve the loan assumption based on your inflated income declarations last month to prove you could afford to buy me out, there was no waiting period. The title company finalized the paperwork an hour ago. The deed is officially recorded." Harrison froze. The color rapidly drained from his perfectly tanned face. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the $30,000 roof replacement we scheduled for next month," I said, my voice dropping its cheerful facade and turning ice cold. "I am talking about the skyrocketing property taxes due in 3 weeks. The house appraisal came back last week, Harrison. Property values in this neighborhood plummeted. We are underwater on the mortgage by at least $80,000. It is a depreciating asset, a massive financial liability. And as of an hour ago, that liability is entirely yours. My name is off the deed and the loan. You wanted the house so badly, you got it. Every single crumbling brick of it. He stood completely paralyzed in the foyer. The glass of sparkling water slipped slightly in his grip. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His brilliant master plan to leave me with the debt while he ran off with the stolen $4 million was already falling apart, and he did not even realize the true extent of his failure yet. I did not wait for his response. I turned the brass handle of the heavy oak front door, pulled my suitcase over the threshold, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I pulled the door shut behind me, the heavy click of the latch sounding like a prison cell finally unlocking. I pulled out of the neighborhood, watching the sprawling manicured lawns and identical brick facades fade away in my rearview mirror. For years, I had bent over backward trying to fit into his world, trying to appease his mother and sister, trying to be the perfect corporate wife. All of it was a carefully constructed illusion. Now the illusion was shattered, and I felt nothing but an incredible surge of power. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the valet circle of a downtown luxury hotel. I handed my keys to the attendant, tipped him generously, and walked into the lobby. I booked their best executive suite for the next 2 weeks. I needed a secure environment with high-speed internet and zero interruptions. Once I got to my room on the 15th floor, I did not unpack my clothes. I went straight to the sleek glass desk by the window, pulled out my laptop, and retrieved the encrypted flash drive from my purse. Harrison had played his opening hand. Tomorrow, the rest of his family would inevitably try to play theirs. I plugged the drive into my computer, the screen illuminating the dark room. Let them come. Let them. I watched him stand there, entirely convinced of his own genius. He took another sip of his sparkling water, his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for a few more weeks to negotiate to show him exactly how much power he held over my life. Instead, I let out a soft, relaxed breath and offered him a warm, genuine smile. I turned around and walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom. I grabbed the sleek black suitcase I had pulled from the closet earlier that afternoon. I methodically packed my essential clothes, my toiletries, and my most important financial documents. I zipped it closed, the sound sharp and definitive in the quiet house. When I rolled the suitcase back down the hallway, Harrison was still standing in the kitchen. His smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "You are leaving right now?" he asked, his voice losing a bit of its condescending edge. He clearly had not anticipated this level of immediate compliance. He wanted a fight so he could play the victim later. I did not answer him right away. I walked over to the marble island, reached into my purse, and pulled out my heavy set of house keys. I held them up for a moment, letting the metal catch the overhead lights before dropping them onto the counter. The heavy clatter echoed sharply against the expensive tile backsplash. "Take all the time you need to heal, Harrison," I said, keeping my tone impossibly light and pleasant. "I hope this physical space brings you all the emotional closure you are looking for." He narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by my calm demeanor. "Good," he muttered, trying to regain his footing. "I will have the movers contact you about the rest of your office furniture." "Oh, there is no need for that," I replied cheerfully, gripping the handle of my suitcase. "I am only taking my personal belongings. You can keep the furniture. In fact, you can keep all of it. Just a heads up, Harrison. When your lawyer sent over the initial settlement packet demanding I give up my equity in exchange for a clean break, he included the quitclaim deed. I signed it this morning." Harrison crossed his arms, looking bored. "Yes, Audrey, I know how property transfers work." "I do not think you do," I countered, taking a step toward the front door. "Because my attorney electronically filed that quitclaim deed with the county clerk the second I signed it. And since you so arrogantly pushed your mortgage company to pre-approve the loan assumption based on your inflated income declarations last month, To prove you could afford to buy me out, there was no waiting period. The title company finalized the paperwork an hour ago. The deed is officially recorded. Harrison froze. The color rapidly drained from his perfectly tanned face. What are you talking about? I am talking about the $30,000 roof replacement we scheduled for next month, I said, my voice dropping its cheerful facade and turning ice cold. I am talking about the skyrocketing property taxes due in 3 weeks. The house appraisal came back last week, Harrison. Property values in this neighborhood plummeted. We are underwater on the mortgage by at least $80,000. It is a depreciating asset, a massive financial liability. And as of an hour ago, that liability is entirely yours. My name is off the deed and the loan. You wanted the house so badly, you got it. Every single crumbling brick of it. He stood completely paralyzed in the foyer. The glass of sparkling water slipped slightly in his grip. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His brilliant master plan to leave me with the debt while he ran off with the stolen $4 million was already falling apart, and he did not even realize the true extent of his failure yet. I did not wait for his response. I turned the brass handle of the heavy oak front door, pulled my suitcase over the threshold, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I pulled the door shut behind me, the heavy click of the latch sounding like a prison cell finally unlocking. I pulled out of the neighborhood, watching the sprawling, manicured lawns and identical brick facades fade away in my rearview mirror. For years I had bent over backward trying to fit into his world, trying to appease his mother and sister, trying to be the perfect corporate wife. All of it was a carefully constructed illusion. Now the illusion was shattered, and I felt nothing but an incredible surge of power. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the valet circle of a downtown luxury hotel. I handed my keys to the attendant, tipped him generously, and walked into the lobby. I booked their best executive suite for the next 2 weeks. I needed a secure environment with high-speed internet and zero interruptions. Once I got to my room on the 15th floor, I did not unpack my clothes. I went straight to the sleek glass desk by the window, pulled out my laptop, and retrieved the encrypted flash drive from my purse. Harrison had played his opening hand. Tomorrow, the rest of his family would inevitably try to play theirs. I plugged the drive into my computer, the screen illuminating the dark room. Let them come. I looked down at the massive, sparkling stone on my left hand. For years, I had worn it carefully, making sure never to bang it against hard desk edges, treating it with the extreme reverence Beatrice insisted a 6th-generation family heirloom deserved. I slowly slid the metal band past my knuckle. The ring felt remarkably light in my palm, a detail I had deliberately ignored for years out of respect for their supposed rich family history. I held it up between my thumb and index finger. Beatrice's eyes gleamed with greedy triumph, fully believing I was conceding defeat under the crushing weight of public pressure. She extended her hand further, her manicured fingers twitching with anticipation. Instead of placing the ring into her waiting palm, I reached for the tall glass of ice water sitting next to my keyboard. I held the ring directly over the rim and simply let go. It dropped into the water and sank instantly to the bottom, hitting the thick glass with a dull, hollow clink. The stone immediately lost all its manufactured fire and brilliance, looking exactly like a piece of cheap, cloudy glass submerged in the melting ice. Beatrice gasped sharply, practically lunging across my desk and plunging her bare hand into my water glass to retrieve it. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, freezing water dripping onto her expensive silk blouse and polished shoes. "You are ruining it." I calmly clicked my mouse, minimizing my spreadsheets, and opening a locked folder on my desktop labeled Personal Insurance. I grabbed the edge of my large high-definition monitor and turned it around so it faced her Naomi and the dozen coworkers who were eagerly watching the spectacle unfold. "You cannot ruin cubic zirconia with tap water," Beatrice, I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the back row of cubicles. 5 years ago, when Harrison and I were updating our comprehensive homeowners insurance policy, the company required a certified gemologist appraisal for all scheduled luxury jewelry. I took your priceless, aristocratic heirloom to an independent laboratory in the Diamond District. I pointed a finger at the glowing screen, reading the official notarized document out loud for the entire department to hear. Center stone is a synthetic cubic zirconia. Setting is low-grade gold-plated brass. Estimated retail replacement value is $45. The tense silence in the office immediately shifted from shocked anticipation to poorly concealed amusement. Someone in the risk assessment department coughed loudly to cover a laugh. Naomi's jaw practically unhinged, her eyes darting frantically between the wet, cloudy ring in her mother's shaking hand and the official laboratory seal glowing on my monitor. "You are lying!" Beatrice stammered, her face turning a violently mottled shade of crimson. "This is a fake document. You switched the stones. You stole the real diamond to fund your secret lifestyle." I shook my head, my expression completely impassive and cold. "We both know the truth, Beatrice. Your family went completely broke a decade ago trying to keep up appearances at the country club. Harrison proposed to me with a cheap prop he bought off the internet because neither of you had a single dime to your name. I kept your embarrassing secret for 5 years to protect your fragile ego. I let you parade around at holiday dinners talking about your vast heritage because I actually cared about your son. But since you want to march into my corporate office and loudly accuse me of ruining his life, you can take your $45 piece of glass and leave." Beatrice stood absolutely frozen. The carefully constructed facade of upper-class superiority she had desperately maintained for her entire adult life had just been violently shattered in front of 30 highly paid financial professionals. Naomi tugged frantically at her mother's sleeve, her own face burning with deep, inescapable humiliation. "Let us go, Mom," Naomi hissed, practically dragging the older woman backward toward the exit. "Everyone is staring at us." Beatrice did not say another word. She clutched the cheap, wet ring tightly in her fist, turned on her heel, and practically ran toward the glass lobby doors, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished concrete floor. Naomi scurried right behind her, keeping her head down to avoid the mocking stares of my colleagues. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, sealing the office back in its professional bubble. For a moment, the room remained perfectly still. Then my department manager gave a short, authoritative clap from his doorway. "All right, everyone, the show is over. Let us get back to the merger files." Slowly, the normal rhythm of the room resumed. Keyboards started clicking again, and desk phones began to ring. I turned my monitor back around, let out a long, controlled breath, and reached for my coffee. I had won the morning battle, but I knew Harrison would not stop there. Just as I settled my hands back onto my keyboard, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden desk. It was not a standard text message notification. It was a secure silent ping from an encrypted messaging application I rarely used. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. The message was from an untraceable anonymous number. I stared at the glowing white text on the black screen, my stomach performing a slow, sickening flip. The message read, "Meet me at the parking garage in 10 minutes. Harrison is framing you." I stared at the glowing white text on the black screen. "Meet me at the parking garage in 10 minutes. Harrison is framing you." My analytical mind raced through the possibilities. It could be a trap orchestrated by Harrison to intimidate me further, but the wording was specific. Framing you. That implied the sender knew about the massive offshore transfer. I grabbed my blazer, locked my computer screen, and walked briskly toward the elevator banks. The underground parking garage beneath my corporate building was a sprawling concrete cavern, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The air was cool and smelled faintly of exhaust and damp asphalt. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as I stepped out of the elevator lobby and scanned the rows of high-end vehicles. I walked toward my designated parking spot, my senses on high alert. "Over here, Audrey." A deep, quiet voice echoed from the shadows behind a large concrete pillar. I stopped, my heart hammering against my ribs, and turned toward the sound. A tall, sharply dressed African-American man stepped into the dim light. He was wearing a dark gray tailored suit, his expression tighter and more furious than I had ever seen it. It was Jamal. He was married to Naomi, which unfortunately made him Harrison's brother-in-law. Jamal. I breathed, genuinely shocked. What are you doing here? Does Naomi know you are meeting me? Jamal scoffed, a bitter, exhausted sound that echoed in the empty garage. Naomi is currently at a high-end boutique with her mother celebrating what they believe is your complete emotional destruction. No, she does not know I am here. And if she did, she would absolutely try to stop me. I am not here as an ambassador for that toxic family, Audrey. I am here to protect myself, my career, and my kids from your sociopathic husband. I took a step closer, studying his face. Jamal was a brilliant cybersecurity expert who contracted for several major defense firms. He was a man built on strict logic, unwavering ethics, and rigid security protocols. He was the only person in Harrison's family I actually respected, mostly because he silently tolerated Beatrice's pretentious nonsense with the same tired patience I did. But right now he did not look patient. He looked ready to burn something to the ground. What do you mean he is framing me? I asked, keeping my voice hushed so it would not echo off the concrete walls. Jamal looked around the garage one more time to ensure we were completely alone. Then he reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. 2 nights ago, Harrison came over to our house for dinner. Jamal began, his voice hard and precise. He claimed he needed to use my home office to print some urgent real estate documents because his printer was out of ink. I let him use my secure desktop. That was my first mistake. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. What did he do? He is incredibly arrogant, but he is not a tech genius, Jamal sneered. He thought he was covering his tracks by using a private browsing window. He did not realize that I run a military-grade packet sniffer on my home network. I log every single piece of data that enters or exits my router. When I reviewed the network logs yesterday morning, I saw exactly what he was doing. He was not printing real estate documents. He was accessing offshore banking portals and establishing a limited liability company in the Cayman Islands. I nodded slowly, putting the pieces together. Apex Holdings. I found the security camera footage in my office yesterday. I already know about the $4 million. Jamal looked mildly surprised, but the intense anger in his eyes did not waver. Good. Then you already know he is actively trying to drain your marital assets. But what you do not know, Audrey, is the digital infrastructure he used to execute the massive wire transfer. Jamal held out his hand. Resting in the center of his broad palm was a small, heavy-duty metallic encrypted flash drive. I am the primary breadwinner for my family, Jamal said, his tone turning fiercely protective. I hold a top-secret government security clearance. I refuse to let my wife's idiot brother drag me into a federal money laundering investigation just because he wants a cheap divorce. Harrison is playing a very dangerous game. He thinks he can use my home network to mask his internet protocol address, deflecting the federal heat onto me, while simultaneously linking the offshore accounts explicitly to your identity. I reached out and took the cold metal drive from his hand. My fingers closed tightly around it. What exactly is on this? I asked. Everything you need to completely bury him, Jamal replied without hesitation. I pulled his complete digital footprint. I looked down at the small metal rectangle resting in my palm. It felt much heavier than it should have. What exactly did he do on your network, Jamal? I asked, needing to understand the exact mechanics of the trap Harrison had laid for us. Jamal crossed his arms, his jaw tight and unforgiving in the dim light of the parking garage. He used a basic virtual private network to access the Cayman Islands banking portal, thinking that would effectively mask his location. But he installed the software directly onto my desktop instead of using a secure external drive. My system logs every single keystroke and network request. I have the exact timestamps, the routing data, the session durations, and the confirmation receipts. But that is not the worst part, Audrey. I braced myself, my posture straightening. Tell me everything. Jamal stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, echoing whisper. He did not just use your name to set up Apex Holdings. He used your full social security number, your scanned passport, and a highly accurate digital copy of your signature. He explicitly listed you as the sole managing director of the offshore entity. Then he initiated the wire transfer of the $4 million from your joint brokerage account. My mind spun rapidly, perfectly aligning the financial data with the technical facts. So he is stealing our marital funds, but making it look like I am the one aggressively hiding the money before the divorce is finalized. Exactly, Jamal confirmed grimly. But he took it a significant step further. By executing the transaction from my home internet protocol address, he created a fabricated digital paper trail. If the federal authorities flag the $4 million transfer as suspicious, and they absolutely will because the Internal Revenue Service closely monitors offshore movements of that size through the international banking system, they will immediately subpoena the digital records. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The authorities will trace the origin of the wire transfer directly to your house. I said, the absolute horror of the situation dawning on me. Jamal nodded slowly, his eyes burning with controlled fury. Yes, the feds will look at the network data and logically conclude that you came to my house, used my computer, and collaborated with me to launder $4 million and defraud your husband. We both take the fall for federal wire fraud and conspiracy. I lose my top-secret government security clearance, my entire career in cybersecurity, and potentially my freedom. You go to federal prison for financial crimes. And Harrison plays the innocent victim, walking away with a clean slate and a hidden fortune securely tucked away in the Caribbean. A cold, dangerous anger flooded my veins, completely washing away any lingering shock or betrayal I felt about my failed marriage. Harrison was not just greedy or selfish. He was a textbook sociopath, willing to completely destroy multiple lives just to ensure he did not have to split his assets in a standard legal divorce. He was willing to send the father of his own nieces and nephews to federal prison just to neatly cover his tracks. I tightened my grip on the flash drive, feeling the sharp metal edges press into my skin. My professional instincts, honed over a decade of forensic auditing and corporate fraud investigation, took complete control of my mind. Have the funds fully cleared into the Cayman account yet? I asked, my voice snapping back to a crisp, authoritative tone. Jamal shook his head. No. International wire transfers of that massive magnitude require a strict multi-step clearing process, especially when moving from a domestic brokerage account to an offshore holding company. The money is currently sitting in an intermediary escrow account within the international banking network. The receiving bank in the Cayman Islands requires a final verification protocol before they legally release the funds into the Apex Holdings account. Harrison does not have access to my primary verification methods. I calculated out loud, my brain working through the banking security layers. He would need a secondary authorization token to push the money through the final gateway. He set up a dedicated email address mimicking your professional contact information, Jamal explained. He intends to log in and approve the final release of the funds himself using that fake verification loop. But because of international banking regulations designed to prevent immediate money laundering, there is a mandatory holding period for the transaction. How much time do we realistically have before that holding period ends? I demanded, already planning my next sequence of moves. Jamal checked his heavy steel watch, his expression grim and urgent. The holding period expires tomorrow morning. Harrison scheduled the final authorization ping to execute automatically the moment the banking window opens. He is moving the money tomorrow at exactly 9 in the morning. Jamal looked me directly in the eyes, the immense gravity of the situation hanging heavily between us in the damp air of the underground parking garage. You have less than 24 hours to intercept it, Audrey. If that money officially lands in the Cayman account and the transaction closes, it will disappear completely behind layers of international corporate secrecy laws. Once that happens, the federal trap snaps shut on both of us and Harrison wins. You need to lock him out before he hits that final button. I left Jamal standing in the dim light of the parking garage and drove straight back to my hotel. My mind was no longer clouded by the emotional shock of a sudden divorce. It was functioning exactly the way it did when I was assigned to dismantle a corrupt corporate merger. I was a senior financial auditor, and my own husband had just handed me the most critical case of my entire career. The clock was ticking. I had until 9 in the morning tomorrow to sever his access to the offshore accounts before the $4 million vanished forever into the Caribbean banking system. I walked into my executive suite, locked the heavy wooden door behind me, and engaged the deadbolt. I dropped my blazer onto the armchair and sat down at the sleek glass desk overlooking the city skyline. I opened my laptop, ensuring I was connected to my firm's encrypted virtual private network rather than the unsecured hotel internet. Then I pulled the heavy metal flash drive from my pocket and slid it into the port. A password prompt instantly appeared on my screen. I typed in the complex alphanumeric decryption key Jamal had memorized and verbally given to me before we parted ways. The progress bar flashed green, and a massive directory of raw data populated on my monitor. Jamal had not exaggerated. The drive contained a comprehensive, meticulous record of Harrison's digital crimes. There were detailed network logs showing the exact duration of his sessions on Jamal's computer. There were intercepted data packets displaying the precise internet protocol addresses he used to bounce his signal across different servers. But I bypassed the technical network data and immediately opened the folder labeled Apex Holdings LLC Cayman Registry. I clicked on a large portable document format file titled Articles of Incorporation. The document loaded, displaying the official seal of the Cayman Islands Corporate Registry. I scrolled past the standard legal jargon, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs of the corporate charter. Harrison had structured Apex Holdings as a classic wealth shielding vehicle. It was designed to absorb liquid assets and instantly convert them into untraceable corporate shares. On page 14, I found the executive management declarations. There, glaring back at me from the bright screen, was a highly sophisticated digital forgery of my own signature. He had flawlessly replicated the slight slant of my handwriting, explicitly naming me as the sole managing director of the company. A cold wave of disgust washed over me. He was legally binding me to a massive international money laundering operation. If the federal authorities ever pierced the corporate veil of Apex Holdings, my name would be the only one on the chopping block. I kept scrolling, moving down to Schedule B of the corporate charter. This section detailed the beneficiary rights of the limited liability company. In standard offshore asset protection schemes, the beneficiary is usually listed as another anonymous corporate entity or a blind trust to maintain absolute secrecy. I fully expected to see another layer of shell companies designed to completely hide the final destination of the money. Instead, Harrison had gotten incredibly arrogant and remarkably sloppy. He did not use a blind trust. He did not use a corporate proxy. He filled out the beneficiary distribution forms with the details of a real living human being. I stared at the name typed neatly in the primary beneficiary box, my breath catching slightly in my throat. The name on the document was Madison Reynolds. My mind instantly flashed back to the corporate holiday party 6 months ago. Madison Reynolds was Harrison's new executive assistant. She was 24 years old, a recent college graduate with a bright smile and a habit of standing just a little too close to my husband when she handed him his drinks. I remembered the way Harrison had looked at her that night across the crowded ballroom, a look I had naively dismissed as simple professional mentorship. The final pieces of the puzzle snapped into perfect, horrifying alignment. Harrison was not just hiding our marital assets to avoid splitting them in the divorce settlement. He was not just trying to ruin me financially. He was actively using my stolen identity, my pristine credit rating, and my professional reputation to secretly fund a luxurious new life with his young mistress. He planned to leave me drowning in a massive underwater mortgage and potentially facing federal prison time, all while he and Madison walked away clean with $4 million of my hard-earned money waiting for them on a tropical island. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the name on the screen. He thought he had planned the perfect crime. He had no idea that I now held the keys to his entire offshore empire. I barely slept that night. My mind was a hyperactive engine calculating international time zones, banking regulations, and the precise sequence of legal maneuvers I needed to execute before the Cayman Islands banking window opened. By 6 in the morning, I was fully dressed in a sharp navy blazer, sitting at the glass desk in my hotel room, waiting for the global financial markets to wake up. I had exactly 3 hours before Harrison's automated protocol would push the $4 million permanently out of my reach. I needed caffeine. I locked my laptop, grabbed my purse, and took the elevator down to the upscale coffee shop located in the hotel lobby. The morning rush was already beginning, a steady stream of executives in tailored suits ordering espresso. I stepped up to the polished counter and ordered a large black coffee. "That will be $6.50, the barista said with a polite smile. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my primary platinum credit card, sliding it into the chip reader. The machine beeped, processed for a few seconds, and then flashed a bright red error message. Declined. I frowned, assuming it was a simple network error. "Please try it again," I said calmly. The barista reset the terminal, and I tapped the card a second time. The same harsh red light flashed. Declined. Contact card issuer. A mild wave of irritation washed over me. I pulled out my corporate expense card, which was linked to a completely different banking institution, and handed it to the barista. He swiped it through the reader. Once again, the machine beeped aggressively and rejected the transaction. "I am so sorry, ma'am," the barista said, lowering his voice sympathetically as the line of impatient customers behind me began to shift. "It is saying this account has been flagged and frozen by the primary account holder." My blood ran ice cold. I stepped out of the line, handing the barista a $10 bill from the emergency cash stash in my wallet. "Keep the change," I murmured, taking my coffee and walking over to a quiet table in the corner of the lobby. I set the cup down and immediately pulled out my smartphone. I opened my primary banking application, the one Harrison and I had shared for our entire marriage. The biometric scanner read my face and the dashboard loaded. My checking account, which yesterday held over $50,000 in operational funds, now showed a balance of exactly zero. I tapped furiously on the screen, navigating to our joint savings account. A bright red banner stretched across the top of the interface. "This account has been locked due to suspicious activity reported by the joint account holder. Please visit a branch for assistance." Harrison had not just frozen the accounts, he had completely drained the checking and locked down the savings. I opened my email app to check if there was a notification from the bank. Instead, sitting at the very top of my inbox was an automated message from his corporate human resources portal. The subject line read, "Notice of Health Insurance Termination." I opened the email and read the cold robotic text. It stated that as of midnight last night, my status as a dependent spouse on Harrison's premium health insurance plan had been officially revoked at the request of the primary policyholder. Under federal law, terminating a spouse's health insurance coverage during an active divorce proceeding without a court order was completely illegal. But Harrison did not care about the law. He only cared about leverage. He was executing a textbook strategy of financial abuse. He wanted to instantly cut off my access to money credit and health care. He wanted me to wake up in a hotel room, realize I could not even buy a cup of coffee, and panic. He assumed I was a fragile, dependent woman who would instantly crumble under the pressure of financial starvation. He wanted me desperate enough to sign away my rights just to survive the week. It was a pathetic, petty move from a man who was simultaneously trying to steal $4 million. He was playing a vicious game of psychological warfare, entirely unaware that I was already sitting in the control room of his grand master plan. My phone vibrated violently against the table, jarring me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with a new text message. It was from Harrison. I stared at the glowing words, a cold smile slowly spreading across my face. The message read, "Sign the alimony waiver, and I will turn your cards back on. Do not make this ugly odd. You know you cannot afford to fight me on this. Be smart and just sign the papers. I did not reply. I locked my phone, picked up my black coffee, and walked straight toward the elevator banks. It was 7:30 in the morning. He wanted to play financial games, and he wanted to make things ugly. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 15th floor. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I walked back into my suite and firmly locked the heavy door behind me. I set my coffee on the glass desk, sat down, and woke up my laptop. The digital clock in the bottom corner of my screen read 8:15 in the morning. I had exactly 45 minutes before Harrison's automated protocol would push the $4 million through the final banking gateway. My heart was beating steadily, but my mind was completely clear. I was no longer an emotionally battered wife reacting to a sudden divorce. I was a senior financial auditor executing a targeted forensic strike. I opened the decrypted flash drive files Jamal had provided. I needed the exact contact information for the compliance department of the Cayman Islands banking institution handling the Apex Holdings account. I found their direct international dial line listed in the footnotes of the corporate charter. Harrison thought he was a genius for setting up a ghost email account to control the offshore entity. He assumed he could operate in the shadows forever. But he made one fundamental fatal flaw in his legal strategy. In his desperate attempt to ensure I would take the absolute fall if the federal authorities ever investigated the money laundering, he used my actual identity to establish the primary ownership tier. He submitted my real Social Security number. He uploaded a high-resolution scan of my actual passport. Under international banking compliance laws, specifically the strict Know Your Customer regulations, the physical human being attached to those government-issued documents is recognized as the ultimate legal authority over the account. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the international number. The line rang twice before an automated voice directed me through a complex menu. I bypassed the standard customer service options, entering a specific sequence of numbers I knew would route me directly to the High Net Worth Fraud Prevention Department. A man with a crisp, professional voice answered the line. "Good morning, you have reached the Executive Security Division. My name is Thomas. How may I assist you today?" "Good morning, Thomas," I said, injecting my voice with the exact tone of polite but absolute authority I used when auditing arrogant corporate executives. "My name is Audrey, and I am the sole managing director of Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. I am calling to report a critical security breach regarding my corporate account, and I need to initiate an immediate administrative lockdown." I could hear the sudden shift in his demeanor, the professional urgency kicking in instantly. "I understand the gravity of the situation, ma'am. For your protection, I will need to verify your identity comprehensively before we can discuss any account details or initiate a freeze on the pending funds. Proceed." I instructed, calmly pulling up the digital copy of the forged incorporation documents on my screen. Thomas asked for the corporate account number. I read it flawlessly from the file. He asked for the date of incorporation, the registered agent address, and the precise amount of the pending inbound wire transfer. I provided every single detail without a fraction of a second of hesitation. "Thank you," he said, his keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. "Now I must ask you a series of personal verification questions generated from the public records associated with your Social Security number to confirm you are the authorized beneficiary." This was the moment of truth. Harrison had likely anticipated basic security questions, but offshore banks dealing with millions of dollars utilized advanced out-of-wallet verification systems. These algorithms pulled obscure data from deep within a person's credit history. Thomas asked for my mother's maiden name. I gave it to him. He asked for the make and model of the first car registered in my name when I was 18. I told him it was a silver sedan. Then he asked a question Harrison could never have successfully predicted. He asked for the exact street address of the apartment I lived in during my sophomore year of college, a rundown place I had rented with 3 roommates long before Harrison and I ever met. I rattled off the street name and apartment number perfectly. There was a brief, tense pause on the line. "Thank you, Audrey." Thomas finally said, his tone relaxing into one of absolute compliance. Your identity has been fully authenticated. However, I must note that you are calling from a phone number that does not match the primary contact information we have on file. The system shows an alternative email address for administrative alerts. That is the exact nature of the security breach. Thomas explained smoothly, leaning perfectly into my role as the victim of corporate espionage. My personal devices were compromised over the weekend by a malicious third party. They attempted to alter my contact profiles to intercept the pending wire transfer. That unauthorized email address you see on your screen was created by the hackers. I need you to permanently delete it from the system right now. Understood completely, ma'am. I am wiping the unauthorized contact data from the Apex Holdings profile immediately. You are confirmed as the sole owner and administrator. How would you like to proceed with the pending transaction? Madison crossed her legs, smoothing her hands over the slight curve of her stomach. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pity and victory. Harrison told me you were staying here, Audrey. She began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I thought it would be best if we just talked woman to woman without the lawyers making everything so hostile. I took a slow sip of my cappuccino, letting the warm ceramic mug rest in my hands. I did not say a single word. I simply let her fill the tense silence with her own misplaced arrogance. Look, I know this is incredibly hard for you, Madison continued, leaning forward slightly, her eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. Nobody wants to wake up and realize that their marriage is completely over. But Harrison has moved on. He finally found someone who truly understands him, someone who can actually give him the family he always wanted. She patted her stomach again, making absolutely sure I did not miss the deliberate gesture. He needs a real woman, Audrey, she stated, her tone shifting from fake sympathy to sharp condescension. Not a cold corporate auditor who cares more about examining spreadsheets than taking care of her own husband. It was almost comical how perfectly she had memorized Harrison's manipulative script. He had convinced this naive 24-year-old girl that he was a trapped, emotionally starved victim, and she was his beautiful, youthful savior. She actually believed she had won a grand prize. You need to stop being so bitter, she demanded, her frustration growing when I failed to react to her petty insults. Harrison is incredibly stressed right now because you are dragging this out. He told me you refused to sign the settlement agreement and the alimony waiver. You are just trying to punish him because he fell in love with me. Is that exactly what he told you? I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper, perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. He tells me everything, Madison shot back, proudly lifting her chin to look down at me. We do not have any secrets. We are equal partners. We are building a beautiful life together. We are even looking at premium real estate in Aspen for our winter home. So you really just need to sign those divorce papers today and let him go. If you decide to make this ugly, his legal team is going to completely destroy you. You will be left with absolutely nothing. I looked down at the designer handbag sitting on the table. It was a classic, highly recognizable status symbol. The kind of extravagant purchase a controlling man makes when he wants to buy an illusion of wealth, loyalty, and silence. I looked back up at Madison. She was so young, so blindingly arrogant, and completely oblivious to the massive federal trap she was currently sitting in. You genuinely think you are partners, I stated, leaning back comfortably in my chair. You think he tells you everything. I know he does, she insisted, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a rapid, impatient rhythm against the table. He loves me. Did he tell you about Apex Holdings? I asked. I dropped my voice an octave, letting the name of the offshore company slice through her rehearsed confidence like a scalpel. Madison froze. The rhythmic tapping of her nails stopped instantly. A flicker of genuine confusion followed almost immediately, by a dark shadow of panic crossed her perfectly made-up face. She tried to recover her composure, forcing a weak, dismissive laugh. I have no idea what you are talking about, she stammered, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Is that one of your boring accounting things? She was lying. The sudden, undeniable tremor in her voice gave it away completely. Harrison had definitely mentioned the offshore company to her. He had probably framed it as their secret romantic nest egg, their golden ticket to a life of endless luxury once he successfully discarded his terrible wife. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I had printed the decrypted files from Jamal's flash drive earlier that morning at the hotel business center. I opened the envelope flap and pulled out the first document. It was the official Articles of Incorporation for the Cayman Islands Shell Company. I placed the paper face up on the table right next to her ridiculously expensive handbag and used my index finger to slowly slide it across the smooth surface until it rested directly in front of her. This is the official corporate registry for Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. I explained, maintaining intense, unblinking eye contact. It is a highly secure offshore account currently containing $4 million. I assume Harrison told you this was going to fund your new luxurious life in Aspen. I assume he also told you that you were listed as the primary beneficiary. Madison stared down at the document, her mouth opening and closing silently. All the smug, vibrant color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. What he did not tell you, Madison, is how American financial law actually works. I continued, pulling a second thick document from the envelope. It was the Comprehensive Margin Loan Agreement. I slid it deliberately over the first paper. I watched her eyes scan the bold print at the top of the second page. She was not a financial expert, but the words $2 million promissory note were impossible to misunderstand. Madison swallowed hard, her perfectly glossed lips parting slightly. "What is this?" she whispered, the manufactured confidence completely vanishing from her voice. "That is a standard margin loan agreement," I explained, keeping my tone educational and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Harrison needed liquid cash immediately to fund his new lifestyle with you. He needed to buy you expensive designer bags to keep you impressed and compliant. But he could not simply withdraw the $4 million from the Cayman account without triggering massive federal red flags during our active divorce proceedings, so he used the offshore account as collateral to secure a $2 million international loan." Madison shook her head rapidly, her meticulously curled hair bouncing around her shoulders. "Okay, but he is rich. He makes a fortune at the firm. He can easily pay off a loan." "He is not rich, Madison. He is highly leveraged," I corrected her smoothly. "Everything he owns is built on debt and marital assets that are currently frozen. But that is not the part you need to worry about. Look closely at the signature line on the second page. Look at who he listed as the primary guarantor of the debt." I watched her gaze drop to the bottom of the document. Her eyes widened in pure horror. "He put my name," she breathed, her voice trembling. She looked up at me, panic flooding her features. "I never signed this, Audrey. I swear to you, I never signed any loan documents." "I know you did not," I replied calmly. "He forged my signature to establish the offshore company and illegally move our marital assets. Do you honestly believe he would hesitate for a single second to forge your signature to secure his own spending money? By making you the primary beneficiary of the shell company, he created the perfect legal loophole to list you as the sole guarantor of the loan. He used you as a human shield, Madison. If the federal authorities start investigating his financial crimes, the paper trail points directly to me. But if the bank comes looking for their $2 million, the collection agencies will come directly after you." Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to ruin her flawless makeup. "This cannot be legal. I will tell the police. I will tell them he forged it." "You can certainly try," I said, taking another sip of my cappuccino. "But you have been happily accepting lavish gifts purchased with stolen marital funds. You are currently carrying a $20,000 handbag that was bought with dirty money. The authorities will look at your lifestyle and logically conclude that you are an active, willing accomplice in his money laundering scheme." Madison pushed herself back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "You are making this up. You are just jealous. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table and locking my eyes onto hers. Let me explain the brutal reality of American financial law to you. Because Harrison used my identity to open that offshore portfolio, I am legally recognized as the sole managing director. And at exactly 8:30 this morning, I called the Cayman Islands Compliance Department. I changed all the passwords, locked the two-factor authentication to my personal device, and legally froze the entire $4 million account. Madison stopped breathing. The reality of the trap finally snapped shut around her. When the international bank realizes that the primary collateral securing their margin loan has been permanently frozen in a domestic divorce dispute, they will immediately call in the debt. I explained, my voice cold and precise. They will demand their $2 million back immediately. And when Harrison cannot pay them, because I have locked him out of every single account he has, they are going to aggressively pursue the primary guarantor. I offered her a bright, empty smile. Congratulations, Madison. You are not marrying a millionaire. You are marrying a federal suspect. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially on the hook for $2 million in fraudulent international debt. I hope the handbag was worth it. She did not say another word. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and terrified. She snatched the designer bag off the table so quickly, she knocked over her glass of water, the ice spilling across the wood. She turned and practically sprinted out of the hotel cafe, ignoring the annoyed stares of the other patrons. I watched her run through the lobby doors and disappear onto the busy city street. She was running straight to Harrison to demand answers he could not possibly provide. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser, calmly wiping up the spilled water. Just as I finished my breakfast, my phone began to vibrate violently on the table. The screen lit up with an incoming call from Harrison. He had finally realized the money was gone. I smiled, picked up my phone, and sent his call straight to voicemail. Let him panic. My phone did not stop ringing. As I walked out of the hotel cafe and across the expansive marble lobby, the device buzzed frantically against the palm of my hand. One missed call turned into 5, then 12, then 20. Harrison was relentlessly pounding my number, his desperation radiating through the cellular network. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 15th floor, and watched the digital floor numbers climb. With every passing second, his carefully constructed reality was collapsing, and I was savoring the absolute silence of simply not answering. By the time I unlocked the door to my suite, the missed calls had stopped, replaced by a rapid succession of voicemail notifications. I walked over to the glass desk, set the phone down, and connected it to my laptop speakers. If Harrison was going to unravel, I wanted to document every single moment of his descent. I pressed play on the first message. "Audrey, pick up the phone right now." His voice echoed through the room, tight with forced authority. There is some kind of massive administrative error with my banking portal. The system is completely locked, and the offshore representative refuses to speak with me. Call me back immediately so we can get this sorted out before the market closes. He was still trying to play the commanding husband, still assuming I was completely ignorant. I clicked the next audio file. 10 minutes had passed between the first and second call. "What did you do, Audrey?" The second voicemail was entirely different. The polished corporate tone was gone, replaced by raw, unhinged panic. "The bank compliance officer just told me the account is under a level 5 security freeze authorized by the managing director. You have absolutely no right to touch Apex Holdings. That money belongs to me. You need to call the Cayman office right now and lift that freeze, or I swear to you I will make your life a living nightmare." I paused the playback, a cold smile forming on my lips. In his blind rage, he had just explicitly admitted that the $4 million in the Cayman account belonged to him, perfectly contradicting the sworn financial disclosure affidavit he was legally required to submit in our divorce. I opened a new encrypted folder on my desktop titled Harassment and Intimidation Evidence and carefully downloaded the audio files. I clicked play on the third voicemail. This one was left just 5 minutes ago, right after Madison presumably burst into his office in a state of absolute terror. You vindictive psycho. Harrison was practically screaming into the microphone, his breathing heavy and ragged. What did you say to Madison? She just came into my office, hyperventilating, screaming about a $2 million international margin loan, and then she threw her engagement ring at my head and ran out. She will not answer my calls. My credit cards are declining everywhere. You think you can steal my future. You think you can lock me out of my own money and turn her against me. I will legally destroy you, Audrey. I will drag you through the mud until you have nothing left. I stopped the recording. It was a masterpiece of self-incrimination. He had confirmed the existence of the offshore account, admitted to the fraudulent margin loan, and verified his relationship with his mistress, all while delivering a textbook verbal threat. He was doing all the heavy lifting for my legal team. I attached the audio files to a secure email and sent them directly to my attorney, Meredith. I added a brief note explaining that Madison had officially abandoned ship and the offshore funds were securely frozen. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller identification displayed Meredith's office number. I answered immediately. Audrey. I just listened to the voicemails, Meredith said, her voice practically buzzing with professional excitement. Your husband is completely unraveling. He just handed us federal evidence of financial manipulation and domestic intimidation on a silver platter. I am sending these recordings straight to the Forensic Transcription Service. He is backed into a corner, I replied smoothly. He has no liquid cash. His mistress just dumped him, and he knows he cannot access the $4 million without my biometric authorization. What is his next move? He already made it. Meredith revealed, her tone shifting to serious legal strategy. His attorney called me 10 minutes ago, right before you sent those audio files. Harrison is demanding an expedited emergency mediation session. He wants to sit down with a neutral third party tomorrow morning to finalize the divorce settlement immediately. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the city skyline. He is panicking. He thinks if he can force me to sign a fast generic settlement agreement, relinquishing my rights to unknown assets, he can take that document to the Cayman Bank and demand they lift the freeze. Exactly, Meredith agreed. He is trying to close the trap before the federal authorities notice the massive irregularities in his credit profile. If we refuse the mediation, he might get desperate and try to flee the jurisdiction. We will not refuse, I said, my voice dropping to a low, decisive tone. Accept the emergency mediation. Let him bring his lawyer. Let him bring his arrogant mother for emotional support. We will sit at that table, smile, and let him dig his own legal grave. Tell them we will meet tomorrow morning. The final stage of the trap was set. Harrison wanted an emergency settlement, and I was going to give him an emergency he would never forget. I spent the rest of the afternoon transforming my luxury hotel suite into a full-scale command center. The glass desk was covered in meticulously organized stacks of paper. I had printed every network log Jamal provided, every offshore corporate registry, and every domestic bank statement. I was building the ultimate audit report, and the subject under investigation was my own husband. While I worked, Harrison's complete psychological collapse continued to broadcast directly to my phone. Despite his lawyer formally scheduling the emergency mediation for the next morning, Harrison simply could not handle the sudden violent loss of control. He had spent his entire adult life manipulating people carefully, arranging the chess pieces so he always won. Now the board had been flipped, and he was completely blind. At 2 in the afternoon, a new voicemail notification popped up. I clicked play, letting his frantic voice fill the quiet room. Audrey. I am standing outside Madison's apartment. He panted, the sound of heavy city traffic loud in the background. Her doorman just told me she packed 2 large suitcases and got into a taxi an hour ago. She completely cleared out her closet. She blocked my number. She blocked my social media. What exactly did you say to her today? You are destroying my life. The bank's international lending division has called me 4 times in the last hour, demanding a status update on the collateral freeze. You need to call the Cayman office right now. I am not playing around anymore. I cataloged the audio file, dragging it into a secure digital folder labeled Extortion Attempts. An hour later, another voicemail arrived. The aggressive anger had morphed into sheer, unadulterated humiliation. My corporate expense card just declined at a high-profile client lunch, he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I had to ask a junior associate to cover the bill. Do you have any idea what you are doing to my professional reputation? I am a senior fund manager. If the firm finds out my personal assets are locked in a suspicious offshore freeze, they will initiate a formal internal review. You are jeopardizing my entire career over a petty grudge. I smiled, saving that file under professional misconduct admissions. He was so consumed by his own massive ego that he actually believed me protecting my own money was a petty grudge. He still did not grasp the reality that the federal authorities would soon be looking into that exact professional reputation. By 5 in the evening, the voicemails stopped and the text messages began. It was a barrage of rapid-fire texts that perfectly illustrated the cycle of an abuser losing their grip. First came the overt threats. If you do not sign the settlement tomorrow and release the funds, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will tell your firm you stole from me. Then came the gaslighting. Audrey, please. We are both just emotional right now. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to secure our financial future. Madison meant absolutely nothing to me. I was confused and stressed. And finally, the desperate, pathetic bargaining. Just give me access to half the account, 2 million. You can keep the rest, no questions asked. Just unlock the portal so I can pay off the margin loan before the bank officially defaults me and files a public lawsuit. I did not respond to a single word. Every time he sent a threat, a lie, or a plea, I took a high-resolution screenshot. I meticulously time-stamped every image and backed them up to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I was not just ignoring him. I was quietly and methodically weaving the rope he was going to hang himself with. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a secure message from Jamal. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked. The network logs are completely scrubbed from my end. I am ready, I typed back. He is doing all the heavy lifting for us. I spent the next 2 hours compiling all the audio files, text screenshots, and email demands into a single comprehensive digital dossier. I titled the master file Harassment and Intimidation Evidence. I then organized the physical copies of the financial documents into 3 sleek black leather binders. One for me, one for Meredith, and one to slide across the table to Harrison when the time was exactly right. Harrison thought the upcoming mediation was his chance to intimidate me into submission. He thought he could use his commanding presence to force my hand before his world collapsed. He had absolutely no idea that every frantic voicemail he left and every threatening text he sent was building an impenetrable case file that would soon bury him completely. I woke up the next morning before the sun even crested the city skyline. Today was the day. The emergency mediation session was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and I needed to be flawlessly prepared. I dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, the kind of armor I reserved for aggressive corporate audits. I pulled my hair back into a tight professional knot. There would be absolutely no tears today, and definitely no signs of the broken, helpless wife Harrison fully expected to manipulate. I gathered the 3 black leather binders I had meticulously assembled the night before, placing them carefully into my briefcase. Just as I was pouring my first cup of black coffee, my phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was a secure call from Meredith. I answered immediately, putting her on speakerphone while I organized my final notes. "Good morning, Audrey," Meredith said, her voice crisp and heavily laced with anticipation. "I just received the preliminary mediation framework from Harrison's legal counsel. They are pushing incredibly hard. I have never seen a divorce attorney so desperate to finalize a settlement in under 24 hours. They are offering to let you keep the cars and waiving any claim to your personal retirement accounts, provided you sign a blanket waiver, relinquishing your rights to any undiscovered marital assets." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bitter black coffee. "He is trying to buy my blindness," I replied calmly. "He thinks if he throws me a few scraps, I will just sign the waiver without asking to see his complete financial portfolio. He needs that signed document to take back to the Cayman Islands bank. Exactly, Meredith confirmed. And I now know exactly why he is in such a frantic rush. I did some quiet digging through my international financial contacts this morning. When you initiated that Level 5 security freeze on Apex Holdings yesterday, it automatically triggered a mandatory 48-hour internal fraud review at the offshore bank. They flagged the $2 million margin loan because the primary collateral was suddenly locked in a domestic dispute. I nodded slowly. The pieces were locking together perfectly. If Harrison cannot prove he has clear, uncontested ownership of those funds by tomorrow morning, what happens? The Cayman Bank officially defaults the margin loan, Meredith explained, her tone turning razor sharp. And because international banking regulations require them to report suspected money laundering, they will immediately forward the entire Apex Holdings file to the federal authorities here in the United States. Harrison is looking down the barrel of a massive federal investigation. He absolutely must have your signature on that divorce decree today to unfreeze the account and stop the bank from calling the authorities. He is terrified, I said softly, feeling a deep wave of satisfaction. That is why he was leaving those unhinged voicemails all afternoon. He knows the clock is running out. It gets better, Meredith continued, a hint of dark amusement in her voice. His attorney just submitted a formal addendum to the mediation rules. Harrison is requesting that his mother, Beatrice, be allowed to sit in the room during the negotiations. He claims he needs her there for emotional support during this difficult transition. I actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed brightly in the quiet hotel room. Emotional support. He did not need his mother to hold his hand. He was bringing Beatrice because she was his primary weapon of intimidation. He knew how much she despised me, and he wanted her sitting directly across the table, glaring at me, making snide comments, and applying maximum psychological pressure to force me into submission. He thought the combination of his professional authority and her toxic bullying would finally break my spirit. What do you want me to tell his lawyer? Meredith asked. I can easily block her from entering the room. Mediation is strictly for the primary parties and their legal counsel. We have every right to refuse her presence and demand a closed session. I looked down at the heavy black binders resting in my briefcase. Inside those leather covers was the irrefutable evidence of a massive federal crime, a forged signature, a secret mistress, and a coordinated campaign of financial abuse. Harrison was walking into a slaughterhouse completely convinced he was the butcher. I wanted him to feel as powerful and untouchable as possible right up until the very last second. I picked up the cell phone from the glass desk, taking it off speaker. Just accept the emergency mediation exactly as they proposed it. I instructed my attorney, my voice cold, steady, and entirely resolute. Accept the mediation. Let him bring his mother. Let him bring his arrogance. We are going to let him dig his own grave on the record. I walked into the towering glass skyscraper that housed one of the most ruthless family law firms in the city. The lobby was a massive expanse of white marble and polished steel designed to make anyone who entered feel incredibly small. I did not feel small. I felt like a predator walking into a cage where the prey had willingly locked the door. Meredith walked beside me, her heels clicking a sharp, steady rhythm against the floor. We took the elevator to the 40th floor and were escorted into a sprawling corner conference room with a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. A massive mahogany table dominated the space. I took my seat near the window, placing my heavy leather briefcase on the carpet right next to my chair. The heavy wooden doors swung open precisely at 10 o'clock. Harrison walked into the room, and the sheer audacity of his appearance almost made me smile. After spending the entire previous afternoon leaving frantic, hyperventilating voicemails and threatening my career, he had managed to paste his corporate mask back on perfectly. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, his hair meticulously styled, and his expensive silver watch flashing in the morning light. He looked incredibly smug. He strode into the room with his shoulders pulled back, exuding the false confidence of a man who firmly believed his intimidation tactics had worked. He looked at my calm, silent posture, and clearly misinterpreted it as absolute submission. Right behind him was Beatrice. She marched into the room wearing a stiff, overly formal tweed suit, clutching a leather handbag like it was a shield. She was supposed to be here strictly for emotional support, but her body language screamed pure hostility. She did not offer a polite greeting. Instead, she immediately locked her eyes on me, her face twisting into a deep, judgmental glare. She pulled out the chair directly next to Harrison and sat down, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She leaned over and whispered something into his ear, keeping her eyes fixed on my face the entire time. Harrison gave her a tight, patronizing nod, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply wronged son to absolute perfection. A neutral mediator, an older gentleman with a calm, professional demeanor, took his seat at the head of the long table. He was followed by Harrison's legal counsel, a sharp-looking attorney named Mr. Campbell. Campbell dropped a thick leather folder onto the table with a heavy thud, totally unaware that his arrogant client was actively hiding a massive international felony from him. The mediator cleared his throat, formally opened the session, and began reciting the standard rules of engagement. He talked about the importance of maintaining a respectful dialogue, the confidentiality of the proceedings, and the shared goal of reaching a swift, mutually beneficial resolution to avoid a prolonged court battle. Harrison leaned back in his expensive leather executive chair, adjusting his cuffs with a practiced, casual elegance. He looked across the table at me, offering a chilling, completely artificial smile. He was absolutely reveling in this moment, convinced he was about to secure his stolen fortune and legally bind me to his debt in one swift motion. "Thank you for outlining the framework," Mr. Campbell said smoothly, taking control of the conversation the second the mediator finished his opening remarks. "My client is a reasonable man. He recognizes that divorce is a painful process, and he genuinely wants to avoid causing Audrey any further emotional distress. To that end, we have drafted a highly streamlined settlement offer. We believe it represents a clean break and allows both parties to immediately move forward with their lives without the burden of endless litigation." Mr. Campbell reached into his leather folder and pulled out a thin, stapled packet of paper. He placed his hand flat on top of the document and pushed it firmly across the polished mahogany surface. It slid across the wide table, stopping exactly in front of my folded hands. I did not immediately reach for it. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, letting Harrison bask in his perceived victory. I could feel Beatrice glaring at me, waiting for me to break down. Then I slowly picked up the packet and turned to the second page, where the financial distribution was clearly outlined. My eyes scanned the brief paragraphs. It was not a fair settlement. It was an absolute insult. According to the legally binding terms Harrison had dictated, he was graciously allowing me to maintain sole ownership of my own vehicle, which was already fully paid off. In exchange for this incredible generosity, I was required to sign a total waiver of alimony, forfeit any claim to his retirement accounts, and immediately assume full legal responsibility for $50,000 in joint marital credit card debt. I stared at the thick, crisp paper resting in front of me. I let my shoulders drop intentionally, collapsing my posture to project the exact image of a defeated, exhausted woman who simply could not fight anymore. I allowed my hands to tremble just slightly as I turned the pages of the settlement agreement. I looked up, letting my eyes dart nervously around the room, making sure to avoid direct eye contact with Harrison. It was a performance worthy of an award, and the audience was eating it up. Beatrice let out a sharp, derisive snort from across the table. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished mahogany. "You should be down on your knees thanking him, Audrey," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Do not sit there looking like a victim. You make a very comfortable living as a senior financial auditor. Harrison could easily demand spousal support from you. He could go after your future earnings. He is legally entitled to the lifestyle he grew accustomed to during this marriage. He is letting you walk away without demanding a single dime of alimony. You are getting off incredibly easy." I bit my lower lip, keeping my gaze fixed on the table. Meredith shifted in the chair next to me, playing her part flawlessly. She let out a heavy sigh, acting like a frustrated attorney who knew her client was being steamrolled but could not stop it. Harrison gave his mother a gentle warning look, playing the role of the benevolent peacemaker. "Now, Mom, let us keep this productive," he said smoothly. He turned his attention back to me, his voice adopting that sickeningly sweet, condescending tone he loved to use. "Look, Audrey, I just want peace for both of us. The $50,000 in credit card debt is a shared marital burden. We built that debt together during our vacations and home renovations. It is only fair that you take responsibility for a portion of our past, while I take on the heavy burden of the underwater mortgage. I am trying to make this as equitable as possible so we can both heal." I slowly nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "I know you just want this over with," I whispered, keeping my voice incredibly soft and brittle. "I am just so tired of fighting." Harrison smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He glanced quickly at his attorney, giving a subtle nod. Mr. Campbell cleared his throat and opened another folder. "I am glad we are all on the same page regarding the division of debt," he said, his tone brisk and professional. "Now, before we finalize the settlement signatures, the court requires both parties to execute a sworn financial affidavit. This document legally certifies that all marital assets, bank accounts, and investment portfolios have been fully disclosed during this mediation." Campbell pulled a second packet of paper and slid it across the table toward me. The mediator leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I must remind both parties," the older man said, his voice grave and professional, "that a sworn financial affidavit is a highly binding legal document. It is the exact equivalent of testifying under oath in a federal court of law. Failing to disclose assets or intentionally hiding funds is considered perjury. If the court discovers any financial manipulation after the fact, the penalties are incredibly severe and the settlement will be completely invalidated. Do you both understand these terms?" Harrison did not even blink. "I understand completely," he said confidently, looking right at the mediator. "I have been entirely transparent. I have disclosed every single penny." The sheer audacity of his lie was breathtaking. I looked down at the black ink on the white page. My eyes scanned Section 3, specifically looking for the exact number he was presenting to the legal system. There it was. "According to this document, our total liquid marital assets, including the remaining balances in our joint checking and standard savings accounts, amounted to exactly $80,000. He was intentionally, maliciously, and completely hiding the $4 million he had transferred to the Cayman Islands." Harrison leaned across the table, sliding an expensive gold pen toward my hand. "Just sign the affidavit, Audrey," he demanded, his voice dropping its friendly facade and taking on a sharp, urgent edge. "The mediator has another appointment in an hour, and we need to get these documents filed with the county clerk before the courthouse closes. Sign the financial disclosure so we can finalize the asset division and be done with this." I looked at the gold pen, then up at Harrison. His eyes were wide, practically burning with desperate anticipation. He was absolutely terrified that the offshore bank was going to contact the federal authorities, and he desperately needed this signed legal shield to unfreeze his stolen fortune. I reached out and picked up the pen. I held the heavy gold pen between my fingers, letting the polished metal catch the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I did not immediately press the ink to the signature line. Instead, I looked up from the crisp white document and shifted my gaze directly to the mediator sitting at the head of the table. I wanted to make absolutely certain that the next few moments were formally etched into the official record of this proceeding. The older man looked back at me, his expression neutral but attentive, his pen hovering over his own legal notepad. "Before I sign this affidavit," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, suffocating tension in the room, "I need to ask one final clarifying question." I turned my head slowly, locking my eyes squarely onto Harrison. His confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a microscopic flash of uncertainty, but he quickly recovered. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest to project an image of total unbothered control. "Are you absolutely sure, Harrison?" I asked, pronouncing each word with sharp, deliberate clarity so the mediator could record every single syllable. "Are you entirely certain, under penalty of perjury, that you have disclosed all of your financial assets on this document? There are no other bank accounts, no hidden investment portfolios, no offshore entities, and absolutely nothing else that should be included in this marital division." Harrison let out a loud, incredulous laugh. The sound bounced harshly off the glass walls of the conference room. He looked at his attorney, then looked back at me, shaking his head as if I were a paranoid, delusional child throwing a tantrum. "Audrey, you have my complete financial portfolio sitting right in front of you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I do not have a secret stash of gold bars buried in the backyard. What you see on that paper is exactly what exists in reality." "Yes, I am absolutely sure." Beatrice scoffed loudly from her seat beside him, rolling her eyes with dramatic flair. "She is just trying to stall because she knows she is losing her free ride," Beatrice snapped, pointing a manicured finger across the table. "Sign the paper, Audrey. Stop pretending you are some high-powered interrogator from the movies. You are embarrassing yourself and wasting everyone's valuable time." I ignored her entirely. I did not even blink. I kept my eyes fixed intensely on Harrison. "I just want to be perfectly clear." I continued, my tone completely devoid of emotion, operating purely on logic and legal precision. "Because if it is later discovered that you willfully concealed a substantial asset, this entire settlement agreement is instantly nullified. The court will view it as a deliberate act of fraud. I am giving you one last opportunity to amend this sworn affidavit. Is there anything else you need to declare before I put my name on this line?" Mr. Campbell intervened, his tone adopting a sharp defensive edge. He placed his hand flat on the table, leaning forward to shield his client. "My client has answered your question, Audrey. We have conducted a thorough, exhaustive review of his finances. The $80,000 listed on page 3 represents the entirety of his liquid assets. We are not hiding anything from you or from the court. We respectfully request that you execute the document immediately so we can conclude this session and move forward." I glanced to my right, looking at my attorney. Meredith was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on the table. She gave me a virtually imperceptible nod. The legal criteria had been met. We had him. He had verbally confirmed the lie in front of a court-appointed mediator and his own legal counsel. He had doubled down on his deception with absolute, unwavering arrogance. I brought my attention back to the crisp white paper resting on the mahogany table. I positioned the tip of the gold pen directly over the dotted line. I felt a profound sense of finality wash over me. For 6 years, I had believed in the sanctity of our vows. I had trusted this man with my heart, my career, and my future. And now, I was watching him actively orchestrate a massive federal crime right in front of my eyes, completely blinded by his own greed and his desperate desire to ruin me. I pressed the pen down and signed my name in fluid, dark ink. I slid the signed document back across the polished mahogany table. Harrison eagerly snatched it up, a triumphant grin spreading wide across his face. He quickly flipped to the back page to verify my signature, letting out a heavy, audible sigh of relief. He genuinely believed he had just outsmarted me. He believed he had successfully secured his $4 million offshore fortune, appeased the frantic international bankers, and left me permanently burdened with his debt. He had no idea that my signature was not an act of surrender. It was the final, unbreakable lock on his prison cell. By signing that document, I had officially allowed him to submit a fraudulent financial disclosure to the judicial system. The trap was perfectly legally set. He had just committed felony perjury on a sworn legal document, and his absolute destruction was only seconds away. Harrison pulled the signed affidavit toward his chest, clutching it like a winning lottery ticket. He looked at Mr. Campbell and nodded eagerly, his chest puffing out with victorious pride. "Get this filed immediately," Harrison instructed his attorney, his voice practically vibrating with relief. "Do not wait for the ink to dry. I want this uploaded to the court docket before noon." Mr. Campbell reached out to take the document, unzipping his premium leather briefcase. The mediator picked up his heavy brass stamp, ready to officially notarize the settlement and formally close the session. Beatrice let out a loud, theatrical sigh, muttering something under her breath about how glad she was to finally be rid of me and my exhausting drama. But the mediator never got the chance to stamp the paper. Before the heavy brass seal could touch the crisp white page, the thick mahogany doors of the conference rooms swung open with a forceful, commanding thud. The sudden noise echoed sharply against the glass walls, shattering the manufactured peace of the mediation session and causing Beatrice to jump in her seat. Meredith, who had been sitting quietly beside me, calmly stood up. She smoothed the front of her tailored blazer and took a deliberate step backward, clearing the pathway from the door to the center of the room. She had been quietly texting under the table for the last 10 minutes, coordinating the exact timing of this moment with the precision of a military strike. Two tall men walked into the room. They did not look like corporate lawyers. They did not have the polished, overly groomed appearance of the financial executives Harrison was used to bullying. They wore plain, conservative dark suits, sensible shoes, and expressions of absolute, unyielding authority. They moved with the synchronized precision of people who were entirely accustomed to walking into hostile environments and taking immediate, unquestionable control. Beatrice immediately bristled at the intrusion, her sense of upper-class entitlement flaring up. "Excuse me," she snapped, glaring at the two men. "This is a private legal proceeding. You cannot just barge in here. We are in the middle of finalizing a confidential family matter." Mr. Campbell stood up, adopting his most aggressive courtroom posture to defend his wealthy client. "Gentlemen, I am going to have to ask you to step outside right now. This conference room is reserved, and you are interrupting a court-mandated mediation." The two men ignored Beatrice entirely. They bypassed Mr. Campbell without giving him a single glance, completely unfazed by his expensive suit and loud demands. They walked straight past the mediator and stopped directly across the table from Harrison. Harrison had frozen entirely. His hand was still suspended in the air, tightly clutching the fraudulent financial affidavit. The triumphant, arrogant smirk that had been plastered across his face just seconds ago began to physically melt away, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. He recognized the specific type of authority these men carried. It was the kind of authority that could not be bought, manipulated, or intimidated by a senior fund manager. The man on the left reached into the inner breast pocket of his dark suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet and flipped it open, dropping it flat onto the polished mahogany table right next to Harrison's expensive leather folder. A heavy silver badge caught the bright morning light. "Harrison," the man said, his voice flat, calm, and carrying the undeniable crushing weight of the federal government. "I am Special Agent Thompson, and this is Special Agent Davis. We are with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." The entire room plunged into an absolute, deafening silence. The mediator slowly lowered his brass stamp to the table, his eyes darting cautiously between the silver badge and Harrison's suddenly pale face. Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Mr. Campbell slowly sank back into his chair, the aggressive bluster instantly draining from his posture, as he realized the catastrophic gravity of the situation his client had just dragged him into. "We are here executing a federal inquiry regarding suspected wire fraud, interstate financial manipulation, and aggravated identity theft," Special Agent Thompson continued, his eyes locked dead onto Harrison. "Specifically, we are investigating the unauthorized transfer of $4 million to an offshore limited liability company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Holdings." The name of the shell company hung in the cold air like a live grenade. Harrison's smug smile did not just vanish, it was violently eradicated from his face. The color drained from his cheeks so rapidly he looked physically ill. His mouth fell open, His breathing hitched, and his eyes darted wildly around the room, desperately looking for an exit that simply did not exist. The crisp white financial affidavit fluttered slightly in his trembling hand. The document that was supposed to be his absolute salvation, now instantly transforming into the ultimate, undeniable proof of his federal guilt. The heavy silence in the conference room was shattered by the sound of Harrison abruptly dropping the signed financial affidavit onto the table. The crisp paper slipped from his trembling fingers, landing face up next to the federal badge. Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at Special Agent Thompson, then at his own attorney, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered energy. He forced a strained, unnatural chuckle, attempting to rebuild his shattered corporate facade. "Gentlemen, there has to be some kind of massive administrative misunderstanding here," Harrison stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I am a senior investment fund manager at a highly respected firm. I deal with complex international financial structures on a daily basis. Whatever anomalies your system flagged are simply standard corporate transactions. You are interrupting a private family matter over a banking clerical error." Special Agent Thompson did not smile. He did not blink. He stepped closer to the table, his imposing presence completely dwarfing Harrison's arrogant posture. "A $4 million international wire transfer executed through a residential internet protocol address and routed to an offshore shell company is not a clerical error," Harrison Thompson stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "It is a highly deliberate action. We have the routing numbers, we have the timestamps. We know the funds were drained directly from your joint domestic brokerage account and moved into the Cayman Islands under the corporate umbrella of Apex Holdings. We also know that a $2 million margin loan was fraudulently secured against those exact funds less than 48 hours later." Harrison's chest heaved as he struggled to draw a full breath. The walls were rapidly closing in, and his brilliant master plan was publicly disintegrating. Mr. Campbell, finally recovering from his initial shock, stood up and firmly placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "My client will not be answering any questions without a formal review of your evidence." "Agent Thompson," Mr. Campbell interjected smoothly, reverting to his aggressive defense mode. "If you have a warrant, present it. Otherwise, this interrogation is completely inappropriate." But Harrison was too panicked to listen to his own legal counsel. He shrugged off his attorney's hand, his survival instincts completely overriding his common sense. He realized the federal agents possessed absolute proof that the money had been moved. He could not deny the existence of the Cayman account. So he immediately pivoted to his ultimate backup plan. He decided to throw me directly under the bus. "I did not move that money," Harrison blurted out, pointing a shaking finger directly across the table at me. "If $4 million is missing from our joint brokerage account, you need to look right at her. She is a senior financial auditor. She tracks corporate funds for a living. She manages every single aspect of our household finances. I leave all the banking entirely up to her." Beatrice gasped loudly, immediately jumping to her son's defense. "I knew it," she shrieked, glaring at me with absolute hatred. "I always knew you were a greedy, vindictive woman. You stole my son's hard-earned money and hid it offshore so you could bankrupt him in this divorce. You are trying to frame him." Harrison eagerly nodded, leaning into his mother's aggressive narrative. "Yes, exactly. She is the auditor. She knows exactly how to manipulate international banking systems. She forged the documents and moved the money to ruin my reputation." "You are questioning the wrong person, Agent Thompson. My wife is the criminal here." Mr. Campbell closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose fully, realizing his client was verbally digging a massive, inescapable hole in front of federal investigators. "Harrison, please stop talking immediately," Campbell hissed under his breath. I sat perfectly still, listening to Harrison desperately spin his web of lies. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. He genuinely thought that because the offshore account was registered under my name and social security number, he could simply claim ignorance and walk away clean. He thought he had perfectly insulated himself from the fallout. Agent Thompson turned his gaze toward me, his expression neutral but assessing. "Is that true, Audrey? Did you authorize the transfer of $4 million from your joint accounts to Apex Holdings?" I did not immediately answer. I reached down and unlatched my heavy leather briefcase. I pulled out my sleek silver laptop and set it gently on the polished mahogany table. I retrieved a digital display cable resting in the center console of the conference table and seamlessly plugged it into the side of my machine. Above the mediator's head, the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall flickered to life. The screen mirrored my laptop desktop, displaying a single paused high-definition video file. I looked across the table at Harrison, meeting his frantic, terrified gaze with an expression of absolute, unyielding calm. "I thought you might say that, Harrison." I pressed the spacebar on my keyboard. The high-definition video began to play immediately on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the conference room wall. The audio was pristine, easily cutting through the thick, tense air of the room. Everyone watched as the digital version of Harrison confidently walked into the frame, completely unaware he was starring in the detailed documentary of his own federal downfall. The recording played flawlessly. We heard him explicitly instruct the unknown man to transfer the $4 million. We watched him sit at my desk and bypass the security protocols on my laptop. We heard the cold, calculated cruelty in his voice as he outlined his master plan. He stated clearly that once the divorce was finalized, I would be left drowning with the underwater mortgage, and he would walk away with a clean slate and a hidden fortune. The camera captured a perfect, unobstructed view of him, flawlessly forging my digital signature to establish the offshore company. I let the video run its full length. When it finally ended, I clicked pause, freezing the screen on an image of Harrison's smug, laughing face. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind of silence that only occurs when a person's entire reality is violently dismantled in a matter of seconds. The court-appointed mediator looked utterly horrified, his face pale as he realized his official legal proceeding had just been weaponized to facilitate a major financial crime. Harrison stared at the television screen, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and completely vacant. He looked as though all the air had been forcibly, violently punched out of his lungs. He was physically shrinking in his expensive executive chair. All the arrogant color had drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened slightly, but his vocal cords completely failed him. Mr. Campbell was the first person in the room to break the frozen tableau. He did not look at his client. He looked down at the fraudulent financial affidavit resting on the table, then up at the two federal agents standing opposite him. He reached out, grabbed his thick leather-pad folio, and shoved it roughly into his premium briefcase. The loud, sharp click of the brass latches snapping shut sounded like a gunshot. "Gentlemen," Mr. Campbell announced, his voice completely stripped of its previous courtroom aggression, speaking directly and exclusively to the federal investigators. "Please let the official record show that I had absolutely zero prior knowledge of this offshore shell company, the forged documents, or these illegal financial activities. As of this exact second, I am formally withdrawing as legal counsel for Harrison. I will be submitting my emergency withdrawal paperwork to the judge within the hour." Mr. Campbell picked up his heavy briefcase, took 3 large steps backward, and physically distanced himself from the mahogany table. He looked down at Harrison with a mixture of professional terror and deep personal disgust. "You need to secure federal criminal defense representation immediately," Campbell told him coldly. "Do not ever contact my firm again." Harrison sat completely paralyzed, abandoned by his own high-priced lawyer and trapped by federal agents. But Beatrice was entirely incapable of accepting defeat. Her golden boy was being cornered, and her toxic protective instincts flared into absolute overdrive. She slammed both of her hands down on the table and shot out of her chair, her face flushed dark red with unhinged, irrational rage. "You little snake!" Beatrice screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You illegally recorded him in his own home. That is a massive violation of privacy. You set him up. You probably hired that man in the video to trick my son." She turned her hysterical anger toward Special Agent Thompson. "Why are you just standing there looking at him? Arrest her right now. She is a manipulative, vindictive woman trying to steal my son's money. This is all a giant, elaborate setup to ruin our family name." Special Agent Thompson did not flinch at her screaming. He looked at Beatrice with the tired, unwavering patience of a man who dealt with delusional criminals and their enablers every single day. He reached into his dark suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He held it in his hands, his gaze shifting from Harrison's terrified face to Beatrice's furious one. "We do not make federal arrests based on the hysterical demands of family members," Agent Thompson stated calmly, his voice easily overpowering her shrieking. "We make arrests based on documented financial evidence. And while the video recording confirms the undeniable intent to commit wire fraud, our investigation into the actual source of the stolen funds revealed something much more concerning." Thompson opened the folder and pulled out a stack of heavily stamped banking documents. Harrison did not just empty the joint marital accounts to fund Apex Holdings. Thompson explained, his eyes locking directly onto Beatrice. He aggressively liquidated another major asset to inflate the offshore portfolio. Agent Thompson slid the top document across the polished table until it rested right in front of Beatrice. It was a property deed with a bright red banking seal. "He stole from his wife," Thompson said quietly. "But before he did that, he stole from you." Beatrice looked down at the heavy document resting on the polished mahogany table. Her hands were shaking so violently that the thick paper rattled as she picked it up. It was the original property deed to her sprawling estate, the massive home she had lorded over our entire family for decades as the ultimate symbol of her wealth and superior social status. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice completely stripped of its usual venom, reduced to a fragile, terrified rasp. Agent Thompson did not break eye contact with her. "That is a fully executed reverse mortgage agreement, Beatrice. 3 weeks ago, your son utilized the durable power of attorney you granted him last year during your brief medical hospitalization. He bypassed your knowledge entirely, contacted a predatory private lending firm, and borrowed heavily against the remaining equity in your primary residence." Beatrice gasped sharply, dropping the paper as if it had physically burned her fingers. She stared blindly at the bright red banking seal. "Harrison needed clean seed money." Agent Thompson continued, his voice echoing methodically in the silent conference room. "He needed a massive, immediate influx of untraceable cash to pay the international corporate facilitators who established Apex Holdings. He needed capital to bribe the offshore registered agents and to secure the initial good faith deposit for the $2 million margin loan he took out in Audrey's name. He could not suddenly withdraw that kind of aggressive capital from his domestic accounts without triggering an immediate tax audit. So he quietly and illegally liquidated the roof over your head." Harrison tried to speak, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his collapsing reality. "Mom, I was going to pay it back. I just needed a temporary bridge loan until the divorce was finalized and the court stopped looking at my accounts. I swear to you, the Cayman investments were going to double our money in 6 months. I was trying to protect our family wealth from her." Meredith stepped forward seamlessly, taking control of the legal narrative. She did not look intimidated by the presence of federal law enforcement. She looked like a predator circling a severely wounded animal. "That money is never going back to your mother," Harrison Meredith stated, her voice ringing with absolute legal certainty. "And it is absolutely never going back to you." Meredith turned her attention to the mediator, who was furiously scribbling notes onto his yellow legal pad, completely stunned by the magnitude of the crimes being exposed in his room. "Let the official record reflect that my client is formally invoking the doctrine of dissipation of marital assets," Meredith announced clearly. Harrison shook his head frantically, gripping the edge of the table. "You cannot take my half. That is my money. I earned every single penny of that portfolio. You have no legal right to touch it. You forfeited your half the exact second you forged your wife's signature and moved those funds offshore." Meredith countered, her tone utterly merciless. Under United States family law, when a spouse intentionally commits egregious financial fraud to conceal, destroy, or secretly divert marital property in anticipation of a divorce, the court acts punitively. Meredith leaned over the table, forcing Harrison to look her in the eyes. A family court judge will look at this undeniable federal evidence. They will watch the hidden camera footage of you admitting your scheme. They will review the forged corporate charter and the stolen identity documents. The judge will not simply divide the remaining assets down the middle. Because of your extreme documented financial abuse, the judge will award Audrey 100% of the $4 million as a punitive distribution. You walk away with absolutely nothing. Harrison looked completely hollowed out. The absolute crushing finality of his ruin was finally penetrating his massive ego. He had spent his entire marriage trying to control me, trying to make me feel small, incompetent, and financially dependent upon his supposed brilliance. Now the United States legal system was about to legally strip him of every single penny he had ever claimed to own, but the federal agents were not finished delivering the consequences. Agent Davis, who had remained quietly standing near the conference room door, stepped forward and pulled another set of documents from his dark suit jacket. The family court will handle the punitive divorce settlement, Agent Davis said, his voice deep and authoritative. We are here strictly for the federal criminal violations. Harrison, the private bank holding the reverse mortgage on your mother's house, has officially flagged the transaction as severe elder financial abuse. Furthermore, your corporate firm was notified an hour ago regarding the massive irregularities in your executive accounts. They have officially terminated your employment and are launching a full internal audit to determine if you misappropriated client funds to cover your tracks. Beatrice let out a guttural, agonizing wail. It was the devastating sound of a woman watching her entire identity, her hoarded wealth and her pristine social status, evaporate into thin air. She turned slowly to look at Harrison, the golden boy she had relentlessly protected, praised, and enabled her entire life. You stole my home, she screamed, tears finally streaming down her face, completely destroying her perfect makeup. You stole my home to fund your disgusting affair. You forged my signature on a reverse mortgage, Beatrice repeated, her voice rising in pitch until it was practically a screech. You took the estate, the house my grandfather built. You gave it to a predatory lender so you could buy designer bags for a 24-year-old assistant. Harrison reached his hands out toward her, his face slick with cold sweat. Mom, please, you have to understand. I was under so much pressure. Audrey was suffocating me. I had to secure my future. I was going to buy the house back. I had a master plan. The sheer delusion of his statement seemed to finally snap the last remaining thread of Beatrice's sanity. She did not yell again. Instead, she took one step forward, raised her right hand, and slapped him directly across the face. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek was a sharp, explosive crack that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. It was not a theatrical, dramatic slap. It was a vicious, full-force blow fueled by the sudden, terrifying realization that she was about to be homeless. Harrison's head snapped to the side. He stumbled backward, his hip crashing into the edge of the heavy mahogany table. A bright red handprint immediately began to bloom across his pale skin. He reached up, pressing his trembling fingers against his cheek, looking at his mother with wide, entirely bewildered eyes. For 35 years, he had been her absolute golden child. He was the flawless son who could do no wrong, the ultimate weapon she used to look down on everyone else. Now she looked at him as if he were a piece of garbage rotting on her expensive shoes. Do not ever speak to me again, Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with pure hatred. You are no son of mine. You are a thief. She turned around, grabbed her leather handbag, and stormed out of the conference room without looking back. She left him standing there, completely abandoned by the only person who had ever truly enabled his toxic behavior. Special Agent Thompson stepped forward, breaking the stunned silence. He moved with swift, professional efficiency. Harrison, turn around and place your hands flat on the table. You are coming with us to the federal field office for an official interview regarding the fraudulent wire transfer and the forged corporate documents. Harrison did not argue. He did not ask for a lawyer. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He slowly turned around and placed his shaking hands on the polished wood. Agent Davis moved in behind him, conducting a quick pat-down before instructing him to walk toward the door. As the two federal agents escorted him out of the room, Harrison stopped in the doorway and looked back at me over his shoulder. I expected to see rage in his eyes. I expected one final threat, but there was nothing left. He looked entirely hollow, like a man who had just watched his own funeral. He wanted me to show some sign of pity. He desperately wanted me to react to validate that he still mattered to me in some capacity. I did not give him anything. I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of cold, absolute indifference. I simply watched him exist. For a raging narcissist like Harrison, being looked at with total apathy was a punishment far worse than the federal charges he was about to face. The agents placed a firm hand on his shoulder and guided him out into the hallway. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut, sealing his fate. The conference room was suddenly incredibly quiet. The mediator was still sitting at the head of the table, staring blankly at the wall, slowly packing his legal pads into his briefcase. He looked completely shell-shocked. Meredith turned to me, a brilliant, highly satisfied smile spreading across her face. "Well," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, "that went significantly better than I anticipated. I will draft the formal request for the punitive asset distribution and submit it to the family court judge this afternoon. The $4 million will remain safely frozen in the Cayman account until the judge officially transfers the legal title directly to you." "Thank you, Meredith," I replied, packing my 3 black binders back into my briefcase. "For everything." I left the law firm and took the elevator down to the main lobby. The sprawling marble floors no longer looked intimidating. They looked like a pathway to absolute freedom. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out onto the busy city sidewalk. The crisp afternoon sun warmed my face, and for the first time in 6 years, I took a deep breath of air that felt entirely my own. Just as I started walking toward my hotel, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and unlocked the screen. It was a text message from Jamal. He had been quietly monitoring Harrison's digital footprint all morning to ensure the trap remained secure. The message read, "Just thought you should know your husband's beautiful new life is officially over. Madison booked a one-way flight to Florida at 10 this morning. She completely abandoned his leased Porsche in the airport short-term parking lot. She left the keys sitting right on the driver's seat and rolled all the windows down. The car is probably already stripped or stolen." 6 months have passed since that morning in the conference room. I am standing on the cedar deck of my newly purchased home, holding a glass of iced tea and watching the late afternoon sun filter through the massive oak trees in my backyard. The air smells like sweet barbecue smoke and freshly cut grass. There is no tension here. There is no walking on eggshells, no waiting for a sudden shift in mood, and absolutely no toxic energy. Jamal is standing by the stainless steel grill, expertly flipping burgers while his 2 young children run through the sprinklers on the green lawn. He looks relaxed, a stark contrast to the stressed, furious man I met in the underground parking garage. After the federal indictments came down on Harrison, Jamal made the hardest but most necessary decision of his life. He realized Naomi would never stop defending her brother and her mother, so he filed for divorce and won primary custody of his kids. He completely cut off the toxic side of the family, choosing peace and sanity over the chaotic loyalty they demanded. We are the only family each other has left from that dark chapter of our lives, and that is exactly the way we both prefer it. As for Harrison, his desperate attempts to bargain with the federal government failed entirely. He is currently residing in a federal detention center, awaiting trial for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The judge in our family court case did not hesitate for a single second. After reviewing the undeniable evidence of his egregious financial manipulation, she awarded me 100% of the $4 million Cayman account. Harrison was left with the underwater mortgage, the massive legal fees, and the $2 million default judgment from the International Bank. Beatrice, having lost her sprawling estate to the reverse mortgage foreclosure, was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her country club friends abandoned her the exact moment the scandal hit the local news. They built their entire lives on maintaining appearances, and now they have nothing to show for it but absolute ruin. I did not just take the $4 million and retire to a quiet life. That money was the seed capital for my true calling. 2 months ago, I cut the ribbon on my own elite financial auditing firm, right in the heart of the downtown financial district. I took my years of corporate auditing experience and pivoted entirely. Now I specialize exclusively in forensic accounting for women navigating high-net-worth divorces. When arrogant men try to hide assets in offshore shell companies, domestic trusts, or shadow accounts, their wives hire me. I am the auditor who kicks down the digital doors. I have spent the last 8 weeks dismantling the financial empires of men who thought they were just as clever as Harrison. There is nothing more satisfying than handing a terrified woman the exact spreadsheet she needs to reclaim her power and secure her future. I step off the deck and walk toward the edge of the lawn, the cool grass soft beneath my bare feet. I turn to look back at my beautiful home, my successful business, and the peace I have finally cultivated. If you are watching this right now, and you feel trapped in a situation where someone is actively trying to make you feel small, inadequate, or entirely dependent, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not ever ignore that quiet voice in the back of your mind telling you something is wrong. When someone suddenly needs space, when the financial accounts stop making sense, or when you catch a fleeting glimpse of disrespect, trust your gut. It is your most powerful defense mechanism. People like Harrison rely on your silence. They bank on your desire to keep the peace. They expect you to cry, to beg, and to eventually surrender. But you do not have to play the role of the broken victim. You have the ability to gather your evidence, build your strategy, and execute your exit with absolute surgical precision. You never have to compromise your dignity to expose a liar. You just have to let their own arrogance become their ultimate undoing. Know your absolute worth. Guard your independence fiercely. And when the time comes, do not be afraid to open the door and let the trash take itself out. Thank you so much for following my story. If my journey resonated with you, or if you have ever had to fight back against someone who severely underestimated your strength, please let me know your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of women taking back their power. Remember, your future belongs entirely to you. Do not ever let anyone forge your signature on the life you are meant to live. The power of financial literacy and emotional restraint. The most profound takeaway from Audrey's journey is that raw emotional reactions rarely win battles. Meticulous preparation and financial literacy do. When faced with a partner's ultimate betrayal and calculated financial abuse, the natural human instinct is to lash out, demand immediate answers, or crumble entirely under the sheer weight of the deception. However, Audrey's story demonstrates that weaponizing your own competence is the most effective form of justice. By successfully compartmentalizing her heartbreak and leaning heavily into her professional expertise, she transformed herself from a vulnerable target into the untouchable architect of her own rescue. This story underscores a stark, universal reality: financial independence and literacy are not just tools for building wealth. They are the fundamental armor required to protect your personal autonomy. Abusers like Harrison rely entirely on the assumption that their partners will be too paralyzed by emotional devastation to look closely at the numbers or challenge the false narrative. He weaponized the legal and banking systems, expecting his wife to sign her rights away just to make the pain stop. But because Audrey understood those systems deeply, she reversed his trap flawlessly. The broader lesson here is undeniable. You must know exactly where your money is. Understand every single legal document you put your name on and maintain the composure to act strategically rather than impulsively when under fire. Panicking surrenders your power to the person trying to harm you, while methodical planning secures your permanent freedom.